Today I'm going to be redesigning this piece. I drew this piece 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, and I redid this kaiju in a new scene, a new style, in November of 2024. I'm only releasing this video now because it was a surprise. It's something new in the Clever Kaiju Sing Red art book, and I wanted to do something special for it. The design was fun. It's all my own. A kaiju that is Cobra-like, that collects lightning through its tail and spits it out its tongue, out its mouth. And the idea is that there's a kind of carbon cloud that it will spit out and conduct the electricity through. Not necessarily shooting lightning bolts out of its mouth, but like conducting electricity through a cloud that could kill anything in it. And it's this original design. I had fun with the colors. I was trying to work pretty quickly and simply, and I went for a somewhat generic scene, using some buildings from my own town and just generic buildings, and had fun with the colors. The idea was to make him a little cartoony, like the way he's built is kind of fun, childish. I don't know what you'd call it. To go along with how a lot of these kaiju were kind of suits that someone would wear or something like that. This time I pulled up some reference of Japan in 1950s and a little reference of the sky with lightning, just kind of getting some ideas of how that might look. And then I used the original design and updated it a little bit, changed the shape. To me, it looks a little more mature, how I've laid out the Cobra Kaiju this time. I'm going for a scene with a really simple central vanishing point, the figure taking up a nice chunk of the center of this piece of art. There's going to be a hill in the background, and his silhouette, the kaiju's silhouette's going to break that and come up above it. So that's one of the reasons that I chose the horizon line where I did and to end the hill where I did, is to make sure that the main figure breaks that, its silhouette breaks that, make him more prominent, or her. And then we have using reference of different buildings, and a lot of it I'm making up as well, from 1950s Japan. I'm drawing in the city on this simple blueprint that I've laid out. I'm adding in cars and people and buildings, and this will take a little while to flesh all of this in. The light source that I have in mind is the lightning in the sky. So it's going to be strong, and it's going to overpower any other light source. So the shadows are going to radiate away from the lightning. So on this side, everything has shadows going to the left, and on the other side, the shadows will go to the right. That means our kaiju is lit from behind and from the sides through secondary lighting, but not an ideal position of lighting on a main figure. And so I'm going to work with that and not have him in a harsh shadow. He's also casting a shadow over the street. Also not necessarily an ideal situation where his shadow is coming down over these elements on the ground, which are going to be fun to see. The reason I went with this is what I have in mind here is to go with a grayscale, black and white image, and put some kind of like a film grain into it to make it feel like it's on TV or it's in an old photograph. And construct it in such a way that it feels like this is either a scene, like an actual photograph from the street, but with a little bit of that sense of these are models. These are scaled down models. This is a table where they've set up little model cars and put their claymation kaiju there to make a movie. I want to sort of go with that as well, which has a lot to do with kaiju culture, kaiju stuff. So I want a nice scale. Now this is an 11-inch by 14-inch Bristol board that I'm working on, and I had to choose what scale to go with. If the kaiju was way larger than I made it, then the city, the buildings, the people would become so small that they would be indistinguishable, and it would lose that feeling of groundedness, that feeling that these could be little model cars on a table. So I want a decent amount of detail, and not just in a few foreground elements, but in the whole scene. So that's why I chose the size of kaiju that I did, is to make sure that there's a nice size to every other little model car and person that I lay out. The road kind of curves and sways slightly to the right as it comes down towards the camera. I wanted it to feel pretty lived in, like how would these vehicles be? Would they have rear-ended each other trying to get away? Would they have driven up onto the sidewalk or crashed up into the sidewalk? How do I put some life into it? They're not just statically sitting there. But I'm still trying to arrange them with a nice flow. Each of these rectangle vehicles is flowing down and to the right somewhat. And we'll just have people running away as well. There's power lines and poles, and I don't want those to get totally lost, because they're going to be fine lines. There's trees, but I'm not going to do any leaves on them. I'm not, one of the things I'm also trying to do is to not hide anything. The leaves creating, that could detract from the other elements that are clear. And or it could hide things behind it, and I don't want to waste any space. I'm trying to use the whole space to show stuff. So as the buildings shrink away, they're going up a hill so that you can still see them. They're not disappearing too soon. I want you to see pieces of buildings and city going far away from the camera so that it gives a sense of scale. So different shaped buildings, some of them more like towers. And just kind of building those out and groupings and shapes that feel nice. I had to think about, do I make the city look really destroyed or not? It would have been more challenging had I had rubble and broken buildings. It's more challenging to draw, for one, but it would also be potentially things on fire, dust, smoke, things like that all around. And once you start doing that, you have all these different lighting sources. You have things being hidden by smoke. And again, I want you to see a nice expansive image here. So I decided to leave the buildings pretty intact, things not very dusty. And again, this is reminiscent of a sort of tabletop with model buildings where everything's a little too clean. There's not going to be huge dust clouds and stuff because it's super small. It's not real. So, it's playing with that as well. You'll notice again the Cobra Kaiju, I've updated the design and there's something more mature about it. The kind of action figure-esque, like solid limbs that just project off of the body. It's not as squatty and rounded. there's musculature to its arms. There's a little bit more detail in its sort of cat-like paws, the shape of its shoulders and things. Like, there's just a little more sophistication to the design, and it's a little more slender and snake-like or cat-like than the other one, which was short and squatty looking. And I'm coming in here with a heavier pencil and putting in the figures with a little more detail. They're very small, so there's only a few lines I can apply to each one to indicate, traditional Japanese clothing or Western clothing. And I have some reference images for that I'm looking at from Getty's Images or whatever. And yeah, the reference did not take much time. It would have taken as much, trying to make it up on the page would take longer probably than just having some reference images. The cityscape is from reference too, but it is sort of a composite. I'm pulling from different photographs and piecing it together into something. So I was looking through different shots and I'm like, okay, this one, that camera angle would look nice. I could put a kaiju on that street. Let's go with that angle, but we'll change out buildings and so on. With other photographs, ideas from other photographs and stuff. And really, it's the ideas I'm drawing from, not strictly copying, so to speak. You'll notice that the people started out as just these simple pawns, these little shapes all over, like ghosts, like someone wearing a sheet over their head. And that gives me a sense of the scale based on the perspective, based on the vanishing point, this 1-point perspective I'm using. And then I build them out. The closer things get to the bottom of the page of the composition and to the camera, I'm adding more shadow and more contrast, somewhat, but at least heavier blocks of shadow to add more weight and blocks of contrast towards the bottom. The vehicle that's falling off the bottom right corner of the drawing is there, for balance. When I'm trying to get a feel for, like, if you want it to feel like the road keeps going, and so far the other vehicles, they're getting close to the edge of the paper, but you don't see like the start of a new one. So of course I needed to indicate the start of new vehicles off the edge of the page, but it also creates a sort of empty space there in the bottom right. So although I'm going for a photographic kind of grayscale look in the end with some film grain, the inking style I'm going for is very much pen and ink, very, very much hatching lines with a lot of energy. So as I'm filling in the clouds, you'll see how much I've got to go off of. I'm just trying to build out the feeling of, there's a horizontal line going through it, like sort of waves. And there's an angle to the hatching that creates like a sense of movement and a sense of blocks of cloud. And then it turns into this eye of the storm, this swirl where the lightning will be coming out. Of course, I left the center of that lightning is white. There's no ink lines there. There's no shadow there because it's going to be bright. As the clouds move further away, they become more horizontal because they're leveled out. We're seeing the side of the clouds more so rather than the top of them. if that makes sense. And then I'm leaving an open space between the hill, the skyline on the ground, and the start of the clouds. There's a gap between the two, opens up the composition, and helps the kaiju really pop. And keeping in mind that lightning as the light source, the shadows are on the left side. I'm not strictly following that because the entire front of these things would be in shadow. But I'm going for more the left side of it to help indicate depth. And as I complete this, you'll notice that I'm going to go back and add more hatching, more weight. But at this point, I don't know how much I need. I'm starting in the top left and kind of working my way down in groups because I don't want my hand to smudge the ink, for one. But because this is off into the background, there's going to be less contrast. So less heavy darks, less contrast in the hatching. Further back, so I'm starting with not much hatching, like light contrast. And then as I come forward, I'm adding more. And then towards the end of that, I'm going to decide if I should go back and add more contrast in the back in relation to how much I can put in the front. So you've got to move around. I've got to build out and back and in and back. If I just started in the top corner and I'm just going to add how much hatching I think should be there, it's not going to be enough. It's going to be too much, whatever. And again, this is for an art book. This is very different than my comic book art that I do for First Sun and Sword. And I do that in the Draw Process video series where I draw every page of my comic and talk about my development and techniques I'm using. And this is different. I'm doing something specifically for an art book. It's something that's simply supposed to engage and be pretty to look at, not tell a comic story, not be sequential art. And in that, I'm okay with taking more time. This took quite a while. I'm not sure. Maybe, gosh, let's see if this is going at, maybe 5 hours or something, or 6, maybe 8, if you count. You count coloring and everything even more. That's more time than I like to spend on my comic book pages. But I can take that time with it because I only do this almost never. This is a very rare event, and I want to have fun with it and try something new. And so, again, going for the pen and ink style with a certain, propped, tabletop model look, definitely give it a feel of 1950s and Japan, and use that grayscale to kind of give it that photographic look, but maintain some quirkiness, maintain some uniqueness with the fact that it is constructed in pen and ink with hatching. Let it feel like a drawing, feel natural in that way. And I think I would consider this a success in the end. It is unique. Same thing on this side that I did on the other, with the hatching, not adding too much at first. Sometimes I use a brush to fill in spots, but this time I'm mostly trying to just use the pen to add more or thicken lines. Again, the shadow's on the other side now. As things move away from the camera, fade into the background, they're going to have less contrast. The eye is going to make out less detail. There's more atmosphere between you and the thing you're looking at, so it actually has less contrast. It's actually faded. It's not just your eye seeing things at a distance that simplifies them. It actually is less contrast because you're looking through the air. And that's why things look more blue at a distance. typically. You're looking through the atmosphere, and it turns things towards blue the further away they get. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's a few points about that, and that is why in the background the buildings are more simplified, less perfect windows, more broken lines, less lines of detail and texture. And as you move closer, there's more lines. There's more dashes to indicate stonework or concrete work or brickwork. You move towards the front and you're getting like shingles and each stone and things like that. Again, a certain amount of realism, and yet working with pen and ink, it's not realistic. There's a line, there's an outline. This isn't working simply in color and like a painting. This is each line is already an abstraction from reality. It's thicker. It's only able to indicate things with a certain thickness, and nothing smaller than that. So that's what gives it its unique look, its interest. Started with the basic outline of the basic shapes I'm going to need, and then I'm building out form, light and shadow. And again, I don't want to put too much. I put quite a bit to start with because I know he'll need quite a bit. I want this figure to somewhat look somewhat different than the background. Almost, reminiscent of kaiju films where maybe he's literally been put onto a background. So he could have a very different quality. So he's got high contrast. It also makes him pop and be clearly visible. He's going to have more blacks, more contrast, and his line qualities you can see are quite different. There's a real organic flow to them versus the longer, smooth lines that make up the background. And I'm just going with that by feel. It just felt right to go that direction. But I'm able to articulate, why to some degree. Here I can articulate that. Again, technically the light source being behind him, but I'm also acting as if the light source is just up to his left, and so that I can get a nice, give you nice form. So we have just a shadow on the underside of things, so to speak. For the design, we have this lizard cat-like body, but there's a snake sort of just on the face of it. It was kind of a fun, weird thing to do, trying to figure out how to give a snake limbs, make it look like a limbed figure, but still a snake. So the very long tail, longer and more snake-like than in the last design I had done, and then the snake, the way that the Cobra has the fins on the side, whatever you call that flaps on the side that come down and join into the body of the snake. I'm just letting that continue all the way down his chest in this kind of very flat snake shape on the front, and then the rib cage, the spine, the hips and shoulders and everything just being built on the back side of him. I'm pretty happy with how that came together in the construction of this design. Went with very tall traps to help not make the shoulders. I wanted the shoulders broad to make them look strong, but not make them look like they're just sticking straight out and give it kind of a rounded off look. So they're ridiculously tall in those traps. And the idea is also that in the gaps between the plating, the scales on the face of this snake figure, that you'll see lightning kind of coursing through his body, like from his tail coming all the way up to his mouth. Now it's grayscale, so I have to convey this in only grayscale. And again, it's to look like a black and white TV show or like a photograph to some degree. So I wanted the values, the colors. It's got to be. It can't be cell shaded. It can't be like harsh lines between bright and dark. And there would be a softness to it, not too harsh. Even though it's lightning, so I'm dealing with a harsh lighting situation, but I can't let the lighting look too harsh or the contrast look too harsh, because it's a softer photograph feeling. And I went with watercolor brushes on Clip Studio. They're pretty good. They do a good job of looking like watercolor, acting like watercolor, having a paper texture underneath, even if you want it. And I used that to build gray tones and values. And then I used a thicker kind of gouache brushes to add some color, some value on top of that. If I wanted to especially brighten things up, where the lighting is mainly hitting them from the lightning. And you'll see that just in the finished piece there. And here, as I just draw these random people, they each need to be doing something. You know, some of them are looking back, some of them are running away. But I also don't want them to be, this was something else I had to think through. I didn't want them to be just totally in panic, totally like bleeding. It's not meant to be a grotesque scene. Again, it should feel like the photograph or like the old movies. So I need them to look somewhat calm in their running away, somewhat, and not too much of a gory scene here. There's not big blood splatters or anything, even though there's like a flipped car. And so I had to consider that, I've got someone like maybe hunched over holding their arm, but I was like, okay, no more than that. We're not going any further. And yeah, you'll see how I kind of do it chunk by chunk, making sure my hand's not going right on top of an area that I just inked. And I'll complete a little area and then go back and add more hatching and try to get those values pretty good for now. But I'll make another pass at it in the end. Again, with this photograph feel, I could have made all of the glass look super reflective. But again, that's too high of contrast, too shiny for the kind of camera that would have been used in this photograph, or the printing of this photograph. So I'm going with more of like a hatching look to the windows, but not too shiny. It blends well with every other sort of surface, has a somewhat similar treatment, and that's to help it appear more soft in the detail that comes through in the camera. All sorts of little odd things that I'm considering as I complete the ink drawing. I had realized at this point I should have taped down the paper. It slightly is warping and pulling up, and that will mess up my lines. So I don't do it normally, but my comic art tends to have an empty space before it gets to the end of the paper, so I don't normally have to deal with it, and I don't normally care as much. But with a piece like this, taping it down would have been wise. And you'll see how adding the contrast does help things look separate and layered. Adds the depth. And now I'm laying in the shadow, just a single set of hatching lines that are the cast shadow of the kaiju over that right side. Just signed it, so I'm just about done Before I make any final changes using white opaque paint or adding more ink, I usually erase the pencils so that I can see things, see everything pretty clearly and as it is. So I erase the pencils. There was one spilt spot of ink there that I was using white paint to cover up. This is a brush pen filled with opaque, like whiteout paint, basically. Just changing a few things that I might want to change. Even at the digital stage, there's a couple lines that I change. So like I want to make sure that his claws pop off of his tail on his right hand that's overlapped with his tail. I want the paw, the claws to stand out. So if the line's not as thick as it could be, I'll add a little bit of white there digitally. But we're getting close to the end of the adding of weight to what's there already. This is the finessing, the fiddling with it to just keep playing with it and build it out until, and just see how far you can go with that. How far can you build it out? But, moving around as you do it so that you don't go too far. With the lightning, I already know that, the lightning it will need to not have a black line, but I'm using a black line in the ink to indicate lightning, but when I digitally color and refine this, those ink lines are going to be turned gray or white so that the lightning is bright. To do like a film grain, I did it completely organically, adding white speckled dots via a brush for a certain texture brush for that. Some white dots and some darker dots, and a pleasant surprise to that. I mean, I don't have much experience doing that kind of thing, so I didn't think about how it would do it, but it creates a visual effect that you see here. It makes once you move those dots, it will look like static is alive and moving. And that was really neat because it's just a static drawing, and yet the static on it is oscillating, it's moving. And that gives it a life to a still image that I didn't expect. Only when it's moving, really. As here it is still. And I haven't seen a test print of this yet, so I can always adjust the amount of grain I added to make sure that it still looks good in print. But this is the finished piece for now. We'll see if I can make any little adjustments before it goes to final print. But this is what I thought would look good. And I really like how it turned out. It's soft. And it's odd. It's a very odd piece. And that's part of what I was thinking is if someone, wanted a print of this to put on their wall, someone might do a double take and go, that's really odd. That's an odd thing to put on your wall. It was fun. It was good. And I wanted to do a good job because I'm in that book with some great artists that are going to do great work on their kaiju pieces. So that friendly competition definitely pushed me. So that's the piece. Thank you for watching. Remember, you can check out Clever Kaiju on our YouTube or cleverkaiju.com to learn about this art book and check out the pin click and other things we do. Like that first kaiju drawing I did was from the pin click, an episode a few years ago. And then, of course, on my YouTube, I've got my Draw Process series where I draw comic book pages. And you can read all my comics on my website for free. That's ikecomics.com. Anyways, thank you for watching. See ya.